Bei seiner Amtseinführung am Montag betonte der neue US-Präsident Donald Trump, er werde den Verrat, der in den letzten 4 Jahren stattgefunden hat, vollständig und total rückgängig machen. Mit seinem Amtsantritt sei Amerikas Niedergang vorbei. Unmittelbar nach seinem Amtseid unterzeichnete Trump eine Reihe von Direktiven, etwa den Austritt der USA aus dem Klimaabkommen von Paris, zur Rücknahme von Einschränkungen der Meinungsfreiheit unter der Biden-Regierung oder zur Feststellung auf 2 biologische Geschlechter. Spürst du schon Auswirkungen des neuen US-Präsidenten? Lebst du heute in einem anderen Amerika als noch am Sonntag?
Theoretically, I mean, this is way too early to see how any of these this rhetoric, because that's what we have right now is rhetoric, backed up by ink on a piece of paper. Until that is turned into actual policy, where actions have been taken, it's impossible to judge precisely. I think the potential for a completely different America is there, and again, that's not a judgment. That's for better or for worse. Trump has indicated that he will institute what amounts to revolutionary change in how America operates. And many of the executive orders that he signed would indicate that indeed is what he intends to do. But we haven't seen, there hasn't been time to see how, these concepts manifest themselves into reality.
Ein Hauptthema von Trump ist der Umgang mit der illegalen Migration in die USA. Der Republikaner spricht von einer Invasion und kündigt Massendeportationen an. Alle illegalen Einwanderungen werden sofort gestoppt und Millionen und Abermillionen von kriminellen Ausländern werden dorthin zurückgeschickt, wo sie herkommen. Erste entsprechende Direktiven hat Trump schon am Montag unterzeichnet. Du lebst in den USA. Wie dominant ist das Thema Migration im Land? Wird Trump ernst machen mit Massendeportationen? Wie könnten diese konkret aussehen?
I think the immigration issue fluctuates in terms of where you live. There are certain regions in the United States where the issue of illegal immigration ranks very high because it manifests itself daily. There's other parts of the country where it is simply a theoretical concept. And so the degree to which people get worked up over this issue is not uniform throughout the country. I think Donald Trump is serious about taking decisive action to address how he interprets the immigration problem to be. Understand that there's a significant percentage of Americans who disagree with his interpretation, but elections matter, and he won the election. But there's another problem that Donald Trump is going to face. It's the same problem he faced in his first term. The legality of his actions. No matter how many pieces of paper he signs, there's still this thing called the Constitution of the United States, and there's still a concept called due process. And I think you're going to find that much of what he's trying to do is going to get tied up in courts very quickly. And, while he may have a lock on the Supreme Court, it takes time for court cases to work their way through. And also, many of the things that he's going to try to do requires the support of states, and many states have said that they will not support. So that brings up a whole nother level of, legal interventions. So I don't think we're going to see dramatic, meaningful change. I think we're going to see paralysis as Trump attempts to bull rush this issue, only to find himself bogged down in the courts. And not every court is sympathetic to the arguments that are being made by the Trump administration.
Die Vereinigten Staaten sind überhaupt erst entstanden durch die massenhafte Einwanderung von Millionen und Abermillionen Ausländern. Ist es da nicht paradox, jetzt mit gewaltsamen Methoden gegen Migration vorzugehen? Wie lässt sich das vereinen mit dem US-amerikanischen Selbstverständnis des amerikanischen Traums? Und was wird es mit der US-Bevölkerung machen, wenn sie so rabiat gegen Ausländer in Stellung gebracht wird?
Well, the thing about history is that it's contextual. you know, back when my relatives came to the United States as immigrants, first of all, they were legal immigrants. We need to emphasize that they came over as part of a systemic, official, you know, policy of sending people to the new regions. We also had the entire West to expand into. Indeed, we encouraged immigration so that we could populate the new territories. The United States has achieved, for the moment at least, its maximum growth potential in terms of territory. And now we're in the business of consolidating this territory in a structured, logical, responsible manner. This means that we have defined ourselves as a nation of states, and these states are, have populations that are linked to representation in Congress, linked to taxation issues, linked to basically the rules of civilized society. When you allow unstructured immigration to come in, this society is not designed today to absorb millions and millions of illegal immigrants. So there is no Western frontier to send them off to populate. Where do they go? How do they become absorbed at a time when the United States is struggling with issues of health care for its own citizens? Social security is an issue, trying to build a safety net for the legitimate legal citizens of this country to now say, no, we're going to absorb on an emergency basis millions of people for whom we have no plan. And now we have to adjust at the expense of those who pay taxes and all that. This isn't the old days. Any nation that loses control of its borders is no longer a nation. I think the Germans understand that. I think the Polish understand that. I think Europe's beginning to understand that. The consequences of just saying, come on in and do whatever you want to do. It doesn't work. It leads to a failed society. So America must come up with an answer to this problem. Yes, we are a nation of immigrants. There's no doubt about that. But, many Americans here have lived in this, have family that stretches back 300 years. So don't lecture America about being a new country. Most Americans had the same legitimacy of citizenship or of possessiveness of their nation as anybody in Europe. And so, I look at the Statue of Liberty and I'm compelled by the words that are on there. And yes, I do believe that America should be a refuge for people in need if we can responsibly absorb them. But America is done being the global sponge of the failures of the rest of the world. America is no longer the last refuge for all of your mistakes. We used to be. Whenever Europe screwed up, bam, boatloads of people came over to America and we took them in because that's what we were here for, the new territories. Not today. The problem that America faces today is that for too long, the population of the world has looked to us as being, a destination of last resort. When everything fails at home, we can always go to America. Not anymore. It doesn't work that way anymore. Yes, we will have limited ability to carry out asylum, but Europe is learning. The best way to fix the European illegal immigration problem is to solve the problems in the Sahel that cause people to flee to begin with, to end the endless wars in the Middle East that cause people to flee, to make sure that the people that want to come to Europe instead are able to stay in their own homes, in their own homeland, and have viable lives. That's what we need to be focusing on. And I think that's the direction that the United States is going to be heading. But and before we can even get to that stage, we have to stop the flood of illegal immigration. If you want to come to America, there is due process. And there's due process for even those who seek asylum. But that's not what's happening now. We have basically had an administration after administration that just says, open the border and let them come in and we'll deal with the consequences later. And many of the reasons why is that the Democratic Party is seeking to get a demographic change, a shift to absorb these new immigrant populations and get them registered as Democrats so that they can win and prevail in elections around the country. That's not the reason to have immigration. It's not meant to give one political party advantage over the other. If we're going to bring in immigrants, and I believe we should, I think America is richer for the experience. But it has to be done in a structured way, and it has to be done in a lawful way, and it has to be done in a way that doesn't act to the detriment of the greater good.
Trump hat unmittelbar vor seiner Amtseinführung verkündet, den Ukraine-Krieg zu beenden und den Dritten Weltkrieg zu verhindern. Mehrfach hat er in den letzten Tagen betont, zügig in Dialog mit dem russischen Präsidenten Wladimir Putin zu treten. Putin selbst gratulierte Trump zur Amtseinführung und zeigte sich gesprächsbereit. Wir hören die Erklärungen des neu gewählten US-Präsidenten, die Notwendigkeit, alles zu tun, um einen Dritten Weltkrieg zu verhindern. Natürlich begrüßen wir eine solche Haltung. Gleichzeitig drohte Trump Russland aber mit neuen Sanktionen, sollte es sich weigern, auf sein Verhandlungsangebot einzugehen. Welche Chancen siehst du für einen Neustart der diplomatischen Beziehungen zu Russland? Kann es Trump und seinem Team gelingen, die Gefahr eines Dritten Weltkrieges zu bannen?
Well, first of all, I think we can avert the danger of a third world war. Trump doesn't view Russia in terms of an existential threat. Trump wants to bring in an end to the conflict in Ukraine, and is mistakenly believed that the United States has some sort of leverage that can hold over Russia, in particular the emphasis on economic sanctions. But what are the chances of, your question is, what is the chances of Trump and his team? It's wintertime in Europe, I believe, right? You got snow outside? Go outside, make a snowball, and then take it to the furnaces of hell and see how long that snowball lasts. Trump and his team have a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding against Russia. His team is awful. His team is ignorant. His team provides Trump with bad information. And Trump, therefore, makes bad decisions off of that. But if you say, what is the chance of Donald Trump making, bringing about peace, I'd say that the chances are relatively good if he is willing to listen to Vladimir Putin. There is a reality that must be addressed by the United States. And Trump knows this reality. You hear him. He touches upon it. He can say on the one hand, Russia started this war, but he knows, he has said that this war started because of NATO expansion. He understands that. He understands the need for a European security framework. He and Putin actually agree on so many points that if Trump just stopped listening to the imbeciles that advise him here in the United States and instead sat down with Putin and came up with a solution to the problem, because there is a solution to be had, I think we can do this. It's going to take some time, but I think I'll take guidance from Marco Rubio on this one, who said, he's the new Secretary of State, and he said that there are certain issues that he won't be involved in because Trump is going to take the lead, and I'm going to guarantee you that resolving the conflict in Ukraine is an issue that Marco Rubio will not be involved in. This is Donald Trump's baby, and it's up to him to come up with the solution. Whether he's up to the task is yet to be seen, but his team is the problem. That's the biggest problem, is his team advisors, Keith Kellogg and others. I'm not saying they should be fired, but they should literally be pushed aside and given other tasks. I think cleaning bathrooms might be good, mowing the lawn, walking the dog. But advising Trump on Russian policy is not something they should be doing.
Und was ist mit Trumps Versprechen, den Ukraine-Krieg zügig zu beenden? Ist die US-Unterstützung für die Ukraine mit dem Amtsantritt von Trump beendet, oder werden die USA eine zweischneidige Strategie fahren? Mit Russland reden, aber weiterhin Kiew aufrüsten?
Well, they're not arming Kiev right now, are they? The last I checked, not only did Trump talk about ending all foreign aid, but it appears that the categories of aid to Ukraine don't fall within that universal ban. But Trump has also fired the entire team that's responsible for transferring weapons to Ukraine. And one of the things that's happening right now is that Ukraine aid is being audited for waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption. There's a good chance that there won't be any American aid flowing into Ukraine for 90 to 100 days. Now, Trump will continue to talk tough about Russia, but the reality is Trump has sent a signal to the Ukrainians. It's over. It's over, and you need to bring an end to this. He's also sent a signal to Russia. Putin, you got about 90 days to get what you want. And then, we have to talk Turkey. So the United States has created an opportunity, and it also sends a signal to Europe. America isn't there to bail you out. If Europe wants to defend Ukraine, Europe has to increase its level of spending, and we'll find out to what level of commitment Europe can muster. So, I think Trump. Again, it's early. It's hard to understand because they haven't articulated anything formally. But I just think that what Trump has done by not formally stopping aid to Ukraine, but de facto stopping aid to Ukraine, he's created a window of action where all sides get to show Trump what they're willing to do. If Europe wants the United States to assist it, Europe has 90 to 100 days to show that Europe can put substantive material on the ground in Ukraine on a sustainable basis so that it's not totally reliant upon the United States. That gives Trump options now when he deals with Russia. Trump, I don't think, wants to go in and talk to Vladimir Putin, not knowing exactly where Europe stands on this. So it gives Europe a chance to commit. It also will tell Trump to what degree Russia is capable of bringing about it into this war. Can Russia win this thing? There's the fundamental question. And Putin, I think, will have to show that he can win this. That changes the attitude. But if the Europeans up the aid and the Russian offensive stalls, that tells Russia that there's some leverage he has. That tells Putin there's some leverage he has over Russia in negotiations. So I think Trump is actually doing a fairly savvy thing by pulling back and then creating this window of opportunity where he gets to evaluate all the players to decide who has the strong hand, who has the weak hand, and what's the best path forward for the United States. Because I think Trump gets one shot with Putin, one shot. And if he comes in ill-prepared, if he comes in with bad policy, then he's going to pay the consequences for that. So I think Trump wants to be as well-informed as possible by the reality of the situation, not necessarily by the spin being put on the situation by his advisors.
Nur wenige Tage vor der Amtseinführung von Donald Trump als US-Präsident unterzeichneten Russland und Iran ein Dokument, was beide Nationen zu strategischen Partnern macht. Im Westen löste das einigen Wirbel aus. Iran hatte offengelegt, dass zahlreiche EU-Nationen im Vorfeld Druck ausgeübt haben auf Teheran und sogar Lockerungen der anti-iranischen Sanktionen versprochen haben, wenn der Iran von der Unterzeichnung absieht. Woher kommt die Angst des Westens vor der strategischen Partnerschaft zwischen Russland und Iran und was bedeutet sie für die beiden Länder?
Well, if you read the document, it's not the NATO alliance that everybody was concerned about. Actually, on defense, besides some wording about defense cooperation, it doesn't require anybody to come to the other's aid. It says that if one side is attacked, the other side will not assist the side that attacked it. So if the United States and Europe attacks Iran, Russia doesn't come to the defense of Iran. Russia's saying, we won't facilitate the attack by that. That's sort of a nothing burger. It's not. I think you have to view the Russian-Iranian strategic relationship now in the framework of other venues. The Eurasian Economic Union, which is a Russian-led entity, Iran is a part of. They joined in December. That is important. That talks about a strategic direction. Iran's relationship with BRICS is a strategic direction. The work that Iran and Russia are already doing in terms of defense cooperation and economic cooperation. I think what we're seeing is this treaty is just part and parcel of an overall trend on the part of Iran to strategically pivot towards Russia and China and the East. I think the European Union was holding out, vain hope that it could prevent that pivot and somehow get Iran to focus back on Europe and the United States the way Iran traditionally has over the past decades. But Europe needs to also look in the mirror and realize that they've lied to Iran from the very get-go, that they have failed to live up to their objectives. And so Europe brings nothing to the table. Iran can't trust Europe. There's not an agreement, there's not an assurance that Europe can make that Iran can actually take to the bank. And so I think that this strategic relationship is just, again, one more indication of the pivot being made by Iran away from the West, away from Europe, towards the East. The EU isn't a big player here. The big player will be the United States, and it'll be interesting to see, what, if anything, comes about through any potential negotiation between Donald Trump and Iran over Iran's nuclear issues, and how that could lead to sanctions. Trump has, through his past statements, left the door open for such a possibility. So we'll see what happens there. But the European Union, they're not trustworthy. Iran has no use for them.
Die strategische Partnerschaft zwischen Russland und dem Iran ist ausdrücklich kein militärisches Abkommen. Einige Kommentatoren und Analysten lesen aus dem Wortlaut jedoch heraus, dass beide Nationen bei Bedarf schnell zu militärischen Verbündeten werden können. Wie tief ist die militärische Zusammenarbeit zwischen Moskau und Teheran in Wirklichkeit? Und welche Auswirkungen hat sie auf die Lage im Nahen Osten?
Well, as somebody who's been following Russia and Iran for a while, neither one of those countries tend to work on the concept of a wink and a nod. And what I mean by that is you sign an agreement, but then you go, but it's really a defensive agreement, right? It's really a defensive agreement, right? No, the Russians work on black and white text. What's in the treaty? What does the treaty say? If it isn't spelled out in the treaty, then don't expect Russia to do something. Russia's not going to come riding in like the cavalry unless the treaty says in clause 4, paragraph 3, subsection 1 alpha, that if attacked, the Russians will ride in like the cavalry. And so, no, I don't buy into this notion that they have a secret arrangement and a secret agreement. It doesn't work that way. I think, we are seeing strategic cooperation. I think, we're seeing, on defense industry, the Russians are working with the Iranians to improve the defense capabilities. Iran has already shown a willingness to work with Russia on issues of drones, et cetera. And I think you'll see increased cooperation. I think you'll see intelligence sharing. Both sides are able to gather, unique insights into how the West operates. Iran, through the Huthi, have learned an awful lot about the U.S. Navy. And believe me, that the packets of the dossier about how the U.S. Navy fights is being shared with the Russians. The Russians in Ukraine are learning an awful lot about Western electronic warfare and other things, and that's being captured and sent to the Iranians. So that kind of coordination, cooperation will take place. But the idea that this is somehow, a secret deal that that both sides will, come rushing to the aid of the other, I think is misplaced. It's not. I don't see it that way.
Lass uns beim Thema Nahe Osten bleiben. Nach dem Waffenstillstand und dem Gefangenenaustausch zwischen Israel und der Hamas scheint sich die Lage in einer Art Patt zu befinden. Der israelische Premierminister Benjamin Netanyahu präsentiert sich als strahlender Sieger, der sowohl die Hisbollah, die syrische Republik unter Bashar al-Assad, als auch die Hamas besiegt hat, gleichzeitig den Iran abgeschreckt hat. Teilst du diese Einschätzung? Und wie wird sich die Situation im Nahen Osten weiterentwickeln? Immerhin bleibt die Frage nach der Zukunft der Palästinenser nach wie vor ungeklärt.
Well, let there be no doubt that the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria has created a window of opportunity for Israel that they have exploited to their best advantage. It is brought with it not just the perception of Iranian weakness, but the reality of the limits of Iranian power. Even Iranian generals, the head of the IRGC, has said as much, that Iran has suffered a great setback in Syria. Hezbollah, it is complicated. Hezbollah's strategic position, both in terms of its domestic posturing inside Lebanon, but its ability to project power outside of Lebanon. There was a time when Hezbollah was a loaded pistol against the head of Israel. Hezbollah forces were operating inside Syria, and Hezbollah was a regional power. That's been curtailed somewhat, and so one could say that Israel has shown additional strategic capacity here because of these actions. But then reality has to set in. Iran still is a nation that has ballistic missiles that can shower down on Israel anytime Iran wants. It just so happens that Iran says we don't want to do that. But Israel remains vulnerable to that. Hezbollah is not defeated. And Israel will find out that if they continue to occupy southern Lebanon in violation of the ceasefire agreements, and Hezbollah decides to forcefully evict them. And the last time I checked, Hamas, an organization that Israel said must be destroyed in order for Israel to have a victory. Gosh, I seem to see a lot of guys in uniforms and green armbands parading around the streets of Gaza with AK-47s in their hands, proclaiming victory as the Israeli forces withdraw. So it's a stretch to say that Israel has emerged victoriously. Remember, war is an extension of politics by other means. And yes, while there are some military advances Israel has made geopolitically, occupying more territory in Syria, again, neutralizing Hezbollah for the time being and pushing Iran back. The Huthi were never defeated, and the Huthi had shown an ability to shut down Israeli shipping into the port of Eilat anytime they wanted to. Now that there's a ceasefire, the Huthi have withdrawn and said, we'll stop. But that's not because Israel defeated them. It's because Hamas defeated Israel and got the conditions that Hamas was demanding from day one implemented. Israel is a nation today whose economy is in tatters. Israel is a nation that has become increasingly isolated around the world because of its genocidal policies towards Gaza, which has brought about universal condemnation of Israel. And Israel is a nation that is domestically divided and split. Netanyahu's not out of the woodwork yet. As the hostages come home, more and more scrutiny is going to be paid to the hostage policy of Benjamin Netanyahu. Already, Israeli courts are turning on him, accusing him of lying, of misusing classified information about the hostage issue. So I think Netanyahu right now is trying to put lipstick on a pig, so to speak. There's nothing good about what the reality of Israel is. He still has to deal with the fact that his government is collapsed. Ben Gvir is withdrawn, and right now he doesn't have a viable ruling coalition. So, if he falls out of political power, he will then be subjected to the justice of an Israeli court system that is not inclined to give Netanyahu any benefit of the doubt.
Auf den Punkt gefragt, ist der Kampf für einen palästinensischen Staat vollkommen gescheitert? Und wie geht es weiter, nachdem die Achse des Widerstandes zerbrochen ist?
I wouldn't say the axis of resistance has been broken. I would say that the axis of resistance has been bruised. And sometimes bruises are worse than a broken bone in terms of the pain. And a bad bruise could take longer to heal than a broken bone. But it's not broken. Iran is not defeated. Hezbollah is not defeated. And the situation in Syria remains very much in a flux. It's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen in Syria. And so that big unknown weighs not only on Iran, but on Israel as well, on Turkey, on all regional players. When Syria fell, there were many people, including myself, that thought that meant the end of Israel for Hamas, and that Hamas would have to agree to a ceasefire on terms that were detrimental to the Palestinian cause. But that's not what happened. Hamas agreed to terms that showed that Hamas won. And again, Hamas wins by surviving. And Hamas not only survived, but Hamas physically defeated the Israeli occupiers who are now compelled to leave with their tail between their legs. That's good for Gaza in terms of retaining its sovereign control over the territory. The problem is for Palestine. What is Palestine? When we keep talking about Palestinian state aspirations, are we talking about it from the perspective of Hamas, or are we speaking about the perspective of Abu Mazen, President Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, who lacks any legitimacy amongst the Palestinian people today because of his complicity with the Israeli government in terms of not only opposing, what Hamas was doing in Gaza, but now assisting Israel in the suppression of, Palestinian statehood aspirations in the West Bank. What is Palestine? And that's the biggest problem right now, is that in order to even think about advancing the cause of Palestine, the Palestinians are going to have to learn to come together in one voice. And this means that the next phase here is not just resisting Israel in the West Bank, which obviously needs to be done, but for the Palestinians to come together. If the Palestinians can't come together, then Israel and the United States and others have shown themselves to be very expert at divide and conquer tactics. And they will continue to divide the Palestinian people, isolate them, and make them weak. So the Palestinians are going to have to come together, both on the ground in occupied Palestine, but also around the world. The Palestinian cause in diaspora needs to come together with one voice.
Übrig geblieben sind noch die Huthi in Jemen. Unter US-Präsident Joe Biden haben die USA und ihre Alliierten versucht, die Huthi durch Luftschläge zu besiegen. Wird Trump diese Politik fortsetzen, oder werden die USA einen anderen Umgang mit den Huthi wählen?
Well, again, the Houthi problem has solved itself by this ceasefire. The best way to control the Houthi in terms of their attacks against Israeli interests is to make sure the ceasefire lasts. One never knows. Ansarallah may decide that its next goal is to, step up in defense of the Palestinians on the West Bank who are being brutally assaulted by the Israelis as we speak. But I can say this, that Donald Trump will have no more luck in trying to intimidate the Houthi than Joe Biden did. An aircraft carrier is an aircraft carrier. It doesn't matter who the president is. The bombs dropped by those airplanes don't give a damn who the president is, and neither do the Houthi. And so I think the best way to keep the Houthi out of the fight is to make sure that the ceasefire that was brokered with Hamas in Gaza lasts.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.